On this day in history, May 26th, 1864, Montana is organized as a United States territory. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, going over the history of the state. That part of Montana, lying east of the Continental Divide, became a part of the United States with the purchase of Louisiana from France in 1803. The smaller region west of the Divide belonged to the Oregon Country, which was held jointly by the United States and Great Britain until the treaty in 1846 gave the United States sole title south of the 49th degree of latitude. Montana may have been seen by white men as early as 1742, depending on whether the high, well-wooded mountains reached by the expedition under Pierre and Chevalier de la Vérendrye, French traders from Canada, were the Bighorn Range, the Laramie Range, or the Black Hills. The next expedition was by the Lewis and Clark expedition, which reached the eastern borders of the state in April 1805. They ascended the Missouri to the confluence of the three streams that form it, which they named the Jefferson, Madison, and Gallatin rivers. Ascending the Jefferson, they crossed the divide to the Bitterroot Valley, which they descended until Lolo Pass gave them an opportunity to go beyond the Bitterroot Range into Idaho. On the return, they re-entered Montana by the same pass and then divided their party. Lewis led one division up the Big Blackfoot River and crossed by Lewis and Clark Pass to the Missouri near Great Falls. Clark, with the other division, ascended the Bitterroot and, crossing the headwaters of the Missouri, reached the Yellowstone, which he was the first to explore. The parties met again at the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri. The reports of this expedition stimulated the Missouri fur traders to extend their operations into the region. Manuel Lisa, in 1807, built a trading post on the Yellowstone at the mouth of the Bighorn River, the first building in Montana. The same year, one of his men, John Coulter, losing the trail in the upper Yellowstone country, discovered the future Yellowstone Park. After 1807, Lisa's traders made annual trips into the region. West of the Divide, David Thompson, of the Northwest Company, explored the Kootenai River in 1808. The same autumn, he sent Finan MacDonald to build a trading house at Kootenai Falls, the first building on the western slopes of the state. Thompson himself built Salish House, a more permanent post on Clark's Fork, the following year. For the next half-century, the fur trade dominated the region. That on the eastern slope was soon monopolized by the American Fur Company. Kenneth Mackenzie was put in charge of the Upper Missouri outfit of this company in 1827, and from Fort Union, which he built in 1829 near the confluence of the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers, he ruled the traders and Indians of the vast territory. The trade west of the Divide was controlled by British interests. Iroquois Indians, employed by the fur companies to teach the mountain Indians to hunt for furs, taught them also the Catholic religion. The Salish Indians sent 4 separate delegations to St. Louis to bring back the black robes, and Father P.J. de Smet returned with the last of these in 1840. In 1841, he founded St. Mary's Mission in the Bitterroot Valley. A number of settlers trickled into the Bitterroot Valley between 1850 and 1860, but the real rush of immigration came only when gold was discovered. The first strike was made in 1858 on Gold Creek by James and Granville Stewart, and in 1861 and 1862 a little colony of pioneers was panning the sands of the stream. The later years saw a richer strike made on Grasshopper Creek in the Beaverhead country, where Bannock sprang up, the liveliest town in the region in 1863. Also in 1863, gold was discovered in Alder Gulch, one of the richest placer areas the world has known, where Virginia City grew up and soon outdistanced all its rivals. At Virginia City in 1864, the first newspaper, the Montana Post, appeared. The same year, Last Chance Gulch, the site of the future capital city of Helena, was discovered. And finally, in that year, Montana was organized as a separate territory. Sidney Edgerton was appointed its first governor, and the first legislature met at Bannock. New placer discoveries were constantly made during the next few decades of Montana's history, until there were camps in hundreds of gulches. By 1876, the gold to the value of $144,400,000 was produced. Metalliferous quartz was discovered at Helena, Phillipsburg, and Butte at the last 2 places containing silver veins. The Phillipsburg district was especially prosperous until the decline of silver values forced many of the mines to close. Not until the early 80s was the copper discovery made at Butte, which was to result in the place becoming one of the world's greatest mining camps. The large influx of miners brought difficulties with the Indians. It had been to the interest of the fur traders and the missionaries to keep peace with and among the various tribes, but no such mutual benefit relations existed between the Indians and the gold hunters. The Sioux and Cheyenne united in trying to prevent immigrants from passing over the Bozeman Trail, and this important shortcut to Montana from the Plate had to be closed by the government. The Sioux were again on the warpath in 1876 because the miners had invaded their Black Hills Reserve, and that year they annihilated General Custer's 5 companies of cavalry on the Little Bighorn River. So many of the Indians were killed, however, that their power was broken. The government began to make treaties with the different tribes, in which the boundaries of the Indian country were carefully defined. The Indians were ordered to stay on these reservations. The last disturbance came in 1877 when Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce refused to stay on the reservation and attempted to escape with his followers into Canada. After giving desperate battle in the Big Hole country and conducting a masterly retreat over more than 1,000 miles, he was surrounded in the Big Paw Mountains and was forced to surrender to General Miles. During all these years, the eastern 3/5 of the state was unsettled, and settlement came only when agriculture and the livestock industry began to expand eastward. The first stock and the first crops were raised near the mines and sold to the mining camps. Prices were high, and disappointed miners found the production of food a lucrative business. The first drive of cattle from Texas to Montana was made in 1869. The first rail shipments were trailed from western Montana to the Union Pacific at Ogden, Utah. After the Indians were quieted in 1877, most of the shipments were driven to Cheyenne, Wyoming. The completion of the Northern Pacific Railway through the state, 1879 to 83, immensely stimulated the cattle industry. In 1885, 79,089 head were shipped to market. In 1891, 250,000 head, and from then to 1912, the shipments amounted to more than 200,000 head annually. Sheep raising was developed in Montana even before the cattle industry because it was not so dependent upon transportation. Large quantities of wool were shipped by flatboat down the Missouri and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans and thence by steamer to Boston. Sheep increased from 4,212 in 1870 to 249,978 by 1880, to 1,999,000 in 1890, and to 6,170,000 in 1900, when the wool clip of Montana exceeded that of any other state. In the first decade of the present century, the encroachment of the homesteaders began to be felt by the stockmen, many of whom sold out as agricultural development increased land values. Before 1890, the comparatively little farming was subsidiary to the livestock industry. Farming was developed first in the Bitterroot and Gallatin valleys. By 1880, it showed a tendency to creep eastward into the Judith Basin and down the Yellowstone. Oats were the chief crop, the stage lines and military posts affording a home market for it. The construction of the Northern Pacific extended the area of rural settlement eastward along the Yellowstone as far as Glendive. Wheat could now be raised for shipment. Farms increased from 1,519 in 1880 to 5,603 in 1890 and to 13,370 in 1900, when there were 1,736,701 acres of improved land. Over one half of this acreage was irrigated, while in 1935 only 2.7% of the 47,511,868 acres of improved land were irrigated. This shows the tremendous influx of dry land homesteaders in recent decades. In 1900, little farming was done in eastern Montana except in the Yellowstone and Milk River valleys. But by 1910, the benchlands back on the river valleys were being settled. And between 1910 and 1920, every eastern county in the state, except Cascade, showed an increase in rural population of 50% or over. From the beginning of statehood, 1889, Montana had only 3 Republican governors: Richards, 1893-97, Dixon, 1921-25, and Ford, 1941 to present. In presidential elections, the state has fluctuated, 6 times Republican and 7 times Democratic.